Hey everybody, my name is Derrick Shannon. I'm here to talk to you about auditioning for Drum Corps. Now, whether this is your first time auditioning for Drum Corps or you've been auditioning for the last few years, hopefully I can give you some tips and tricks and just some things to kind of abide by as you go through your general audition experience. I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about my Drum Corps background, and then we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty as far as what to expect within the audition process. So I started off by marching drum corps straight out of junior high school at a small corps out of Nashville, Wisconsin called the Americanos. After I marched the Americanos, I ended up marching Pioneer for 2 summers and then Phantom Regiment for 2 summers. Those 5 summers total so far were all on bass drum. My last summer at Phantom Regiment was actually the 2008 Spartacus year, where we ended up winning the DCI World Championship. Not only did we win the World Championship, but we also won high percussion that year as well. After that, I decided I wanted something a little bit different, so I decided to take a summer off of Drum Corps, and then I still had 2 summers left. Those last 2 summers that I marched, I decided to actually be in a front ensemble, because at that point I knew that I wanted to be a music educator, and I thought that would help a ton as far as how I teach my percussion ensembles. So the 2 summers at Cavaliers that I marched, my first summer I marched vibraphone, and my second summer I was on the marimba line. The last summer at Cavaliers, we also won high percussion there as well. So I'm probably one of the few people on the earth that has won a high percussion title on a battery and a high percussion title in a front ensemble. After marching those 7 years of Drum Corps, I came back to teach, and I ended up teaching the bass line at the Phantom Regiment. After teaching the bass line for a few years, I ended up being the percussion caption head at the Phantom Regiment. And then I went to Madison Scouts to be the battery ranger and the percussion caption head. And currently, I am the percussion caption head and battery ranger of the Blue Knights. So that's a little bit about my background in Drum Corps. I've been teaching Drum Corps ever since I aged out, and have probably been doing Drum Corps for over half my life at this point. So now, let's get into the audition process. So when you audition for Drum Corps, there are a few things I suggest. The first step is figuring out what drum corps you want to audition for. Okay. Now, this can be any drum corps. You know, it might be a drum corps that you saw online or a drum corps that you saw live, but there's something about that specific corps that made you want to be a part of that corps. Okay. I always tell everybody to always audition for their first choice of corps first, right? Even if you don't plan on making that corps that particular year, it'll give you a ton of insight as far as what to expect for the coming years, and you'll have an upper edge against other people that may not have had that experience just yet. So after you find your first top drum corps that you want to audition for, okay, whatever is the top drum corps for you, I suggest finding a drum corps a few tiers down, right? Maybe 1 or 2 other corps that you can also audition at. Now this gets tricky just because of the audition experience weekends might end up being the same at some point. For example, for myself, when I went to Cavaliers, I didn't know if I wanted to go to Cavaliers just yet. So I auditioned for the front ensemble at Phantom Regiment and at Cavaliers, and I went to both audition experiences. But then the next camp was the same weekend for both corps, so I had to make a decision at that point, and I decided to go to Cavaliers. So for you, you'll probably have to make a decision at some point in time between those 2 or 3 drum and bugle corps. Now, like I said before, it's great to have that, you know, whatever your first choice of corps experience, because again, that'll help you down the road for when you want to make that drum and bugle corps. Okay. But at some point in time, you might want to think about, just in general, if you don't think you're going to make the cut at your first choice, or if you get cut from your first choice of drum corps, then you want to make sure you put all your eggs in your basket of your second or third choice, just to make sure that you can march somewhere, because marching somewhere for a drum corps is the best way to make the drum corps that you ultimately want to be in, right? So I suggest finding out everything you can about those drum corps, right? That's the next step. Now, it's awesome because we have technology and YouTube and computers nowadays, so you can search online and probably find a ton of clips from a ton of different years for whatever drum corps you want to be a part of, right? So that's a great resource for so many different reasons, right? So the first thing I would do is look at how they play, right? What do they sound like? How do they look when they play? How do they move, right? Because those are all things that you want to basically take a persona of and make yourself move and look and sound that same exact way. So from that standpoint, watching as many videos as possible and just trying to make yourself and look like those performers is probably your best bet to start, right? After that, you want to make sure that you understand the general expectations for that given staff, right? Most drum corps have some type of packet that they expect you to learn or be familiar with come audition times, right? So as soon as you get your hand on that packet, I would start playing through everything that you can, right? You want to make sure that you have a great understanding of the fundamental aspects of whatever you're doing, okay? So for battery members, that would be like your 8 on the hand, accent tap, double beat, rolls, and flams. For the front ensemble, that might be your double vertical strokes, your single independents, your single alternating, and your lateral strokes, right? So make sure you have a great understanding of whatever those things may be. And even if you're auditioning for something outside of percussion, there's always going to be some type of basic foundational aspect that you need to make sure that you're very familiar with, okay? So I would suggest memorizing that packet if you can, mainly because anytime you have something memorized, you're going to play it much better than if you're reading off of something, okay? So even if it's the most simple thing or the most complicated thing, try and be as familiar as possible with it before you enter that camp, right? You're going to be expected to play those things, not necessarily the same way when you were sitting at home with your practice pad, but now you're going to have people watching you. You might be a little bit nervous, so you want to make sure that you give the best showcase of your ability just in general in that process, okay? So being as familiar as you can with those aspects within the packet or with those foundational aspects helps a ton for making sure that you understand how to perform those things under pressure, right? So those are things I kind of suggested to you prior to a camp, with the biggest being try and get everything memorized, try and make sure that you have a great understanding of the foundational aspects. Now, the next step I'll kind of talk about is during camp, but you also want to maybe think about this a little bit prior to camp. Again, with technology, it's so easy to do a lot of these things. So the next thing I suggest is get a hold of a veteran member of the Drum Corps, particularly in whatever section you're trying to audition for. So for example, if I'm auditioning for the bass line, I might try and find somebody that marched the bass line last year or something along those lines, okay? Now, obviously with technology, you could probably find those people online, okay? And if you send them a quick message, say, hey, I'm trying to audition for XYZ Drum and Bugle Corps. I saw that you marched there last summer, and I was wondering if you could answer a few of my questions or give me some tips and tricks. At that point in time, you have a great resource for anything and everything that you might need to know, because that person went through that process last year or maybe a few years before, okay? So I would kind of get to know those people, maybe before the camp if you're able to find them online. If not, then I would suggest as soon as you get to the camp, start to familiarize yourself with those people, right? Typically, they would probably be wearing their Corps jacket or something along those lines, so they're probably pretty easy to pinpoint and find. At that point, I would try and the same thing that we talked about earlier as far as like finding videos online or trying to make sure you find resources and things like that of that Drum Corps. I would try and do all of those exact same things with that veteran member at the camp. So that I would look at them, see how they sound, see how they look, see how they move, see how they interact with the staff, and try and emulate all those things, because since they were in the ensemble the year prior to that audition, hopefully they have a great idea as far as what it's like to be in that group. So you want to try and emulate that and copy that as much as you can. Another thing I would suggest is as you move throughout the audition process, just be familiar with how the staff works. Okay, every staff is different, and you'll kind of pick up on some of these small minor cues as you kind of go. For example, I'm usually pretty quiet as I teach, and I expect you to pay attention to the few words that I might say, right? I don't necessarily go on really long rants at times, but sometimes I would, right? So just making sure you understand how to have great body posture, have great body language, right? Be very acceptable. Try not to cross your arms and have bad posture, because that seems like you're not listening, or it might seem like you're not taking in all the information, okay? So try and have a nice open stance, right? And take in as much information as you possibly can, right? Throughout the course of the audition camp, I suggest taking as many notes as you can. And that's very crucial to this process, because the staff wants to see your improvement not only over the course of that camp, but from audition experience to audition experience, right? Sometimes there might be 3 or 4 weeks in between different camps, right? And the staff wants to make sure that you are improving over those 3 or 4 weeks. Because when we get to the summer months, the staff needs you to improve the entire summer, right? So if you struggle with making improvements over those months, the staff might not necessarily see you in as great of a picture as somebody else that may be improving better over the course of time, okay? So not only do you need to be a rock star when you show up, but you also need to make sure that you have a continual growth period where you continue to improve, right? I suggest taking as many notes as you can, and I suggest doing this with pen and paper. mainly because you don't want to give the wrong impression with the staff as far as being on your phone, right? Or because to them it might seem like you're texting somebody or you're just not engaged, not paying attention, right? So if I were you, I'd have a pen and paper or a pencil and paper and just write down as many things as you can as far as individual comments that the staff gives you or maybe some overall arching ideas, right? A lot of times staff members won't talk about things that are technical, but they might say something that just in general sticks with you, right? Sometimes it has nothing to do with the instrument you're playing, but it's an analogy that deals with life that relates to everything that you're doing, right? Those are the things that are most important within the activity because those are the things that make what you do really special, okay? So I'd advise taking notes on pen and paper or pencil and paper, right? Because that will help you remember what to work on and as well as remember what you need to improve on from camp to camp. Now I have a lot of people that at the end of a block, they'll come up to me and say, hey, what can I do to improve, right? Now with as many people that audition for a drum corps in any given year, it's very hard for a staff member to say, you need to improve on this, right? So instead of asking that general question on what you can do to improve or what you can do to make the corps, I would suggest taking in all the information that you can because 9 times out of 10 the staff member might say, I think you need to improve on all the things we talked about this past block, right? At that point, you might not necessarily seem as presentable to that staff member. So instead of maybe asking them that broad question, maybe ask them something more specific, right? Like maybe they came up to you and said, hey, I think you need to relax on this one passage, right? So when you go up to them later to ask them a question, maybe ask them a question, hey, I know you said I need to relax on this passage. Do you have any tips and tricks that you can give me to really work on trying to be as relaxed as possible in that passage? So maybe instead of asking them that broad question, you ask them something that's more specific like that so that they can expand upon what they originally said to you and give you more information and insight on it, right? So just in general, you want to make sure that you are the picture perfect example of what it's like to be in the group, right? With that being said, being and looking just like one of those veteran members probably helps a ton, right? But make sure that you're performing the same way you perform on the field finals night, right? Because the staff members want to see people that look exactly like the group did last finals night, right? Because if they can see you, if they can picture you being in that position, 9 times out of 10, you'll probably have a pretty good shot at making that spot, okay? So make sure that you're not just going up there just to play the exercises or play the book in a way that becomes very monotone, right? You want to make sure that everything you do has some level of dynamic to it, okay? Because again, the staff member needs to be able to picture you being on that field finals night and performing your tail off to the best of your ability. So after you finish that camp, I would say usually what happens is you either get a callback, you might get a spot, or you might get cut from that drum and bugle corps, okay? If you do end up getting cut, don't get discouraged, right? You've gained so much knowledge and information about the audition experience that'll give you an upper hand in the future, next year, when you come back again, okay? Maybe it just wasn't the greatest opportunity for you on that particular year for that drum corps, and maybe there's a better position for you elsewhere, okay? So my best piece of advice, if you want to march Corps A, then make sure, and you get cut from Corps A, make sure you try and march drum corps somewhere else. And that might be drum corps B or C for you, but gaining that drum corps experience, again, will give you such a huge upper hand for the next year. Not only will you have the experience of that audition for that particular drum corps, but you'll also have experience from another drum corps where you did go through the hot summer days and the long rehearsal days, and just the general touring experience. So now you have a much better idea as far as what to expect in a drum corps. If you do end up getting cut from that corps, or let's say you get a callback, one of the best things you can do between camps or between another drum corps camp is to continue to improve as much as you can, okay? So at this point, if you get cut, you might be looking at another drum corps packet if you haven't already. Make sure you go through all those steps that I talked about earlier, which include making sure that you understand the packet front to back, make sure you understand it back to front, make sure you're as comfortable as can be with it memorized so that you can do great reps and show the staff the best of your ability level when you get to that position, okay? If you end up getting a callback, maybe this is your first or second corps at this point, if you get a callback, again, the staff is going to want to see improvement from your first camp to your second camp to maybe even your third or fourth camp. Okay, so make sure that you're taking a lot of notes and making sure that you're starting to improve on those things as you go from one camp to the next. Okay. Hopefully throughout the course of that camp, you've gotten quite a bit of exposure, both individually and in a group setting, to where you understand exactly what you need to work on. Okay? If you don't, or if you want some more things to work on, feel free to talk with those veteran members, right? That can probably give you some insight. And feel free to talk to the staff. Now, when you talk to the staff, there's usually a few different staff members you can talk to. 9 times out of 10, the best person to talk to would be your section staff. So that might be your snare tech, or your quad tech, or your front tech, right? Outside of that, obviously you have the caption heads and things along those lines, but sometimes those caption heads see so many kids, they might not necessarily have something specific just for you, just at that given moment, okay? So that section tech will have a lot of great information for you. Maybe they wrote some things down about you that they can look in their notes, right? And give you to work on from camp to camp, right? A lot of staff members will be taking notes themselves, just like you are. And over the course from one camp to the next, they'll look back at those notes and say, all right, well, Johnny was struggling with these fast rolls, right? Let's see how his fast rolls sound at this later camp, right? So hopefully you've gotten quite a bit of improvement from that standpoint, so you can showcase that improvement over the course of those few weeks. And that gives you an upper hand in general, just because we want to see people that are very malleable, right? I like to tell people to try and find out as much information as they can just in general, right? Even if it has nothing to do with that particular drum corps, right? Maybe there's another drum corps that plays a little bit differently, but you can take that information and kind of use it as like a tool in your tool belt, right? So that when you do arise at a problem or an issue that you need to fix, or something you need just to work on in general, you can pull out that specific tool and maybe it'll help for that specific thing, right? There's no one right way or wrong way to do things. Different drum corps just purely have different ways of doing things, right? So catching onto those cues will help a ton, but also having all of those things that you can kind of utilize and pull from will definitely help in the future as well. For example, you might be at a drum corps that talks a lot about relaxation, right? But at some point, especially in some of the choppier things, you might need to squeeze a little bit more. You might need to change the pressure just a little bit, right? There might be another drum corps that squeezes stick a little bit more. So maybe you can take that moment or those tools from that other drum corps or that other drum line or percussion ensemble, whatever it may be, and utilize it towards whatever moment that you need to maybe use a little bit more pressure in the hand, right? Those are things that are definitely very important just as far as the malleable side of things, right? Because not only does the staff want to see you improve over the course of time, but the staff also wants to be able to see you make changes to things that might be an issue, right? If they tell you to stand up taller, right? Hopefully that's the only time they have to tell you, right? You want to make sure that everything you do, just in general, you're trying to emulate that as quickly as possible in that process, right? If a staff member sees that you can emulate all those things and do all those things as soon as they ask them, you're going to have the upper hand just in general as you move throughout the audition process. All right, guys, so as you continue throughout the audition process, again, if you do end up getting cut, please don't be discouraged, right? If you don't get that top spot that you're gunning for, again, don't be discouraged, right? Everybody around you and everybody that's auditioning with you has been through that process at some point in time, right? Everybody that was in that line or in that percussion ensemble or whatever section you're trying to audition for that drum corps were in your shoes at one point in time, right? I remember going back all the way to my very first audition at Americanos. I actually auditioned for snare drum, and I didn't necessarily make the cut that year. And they told me that they had some bass drum spots available, and I said, well, I've never played bass drum before, but I just want to be a part of it, right? So maybe you don't get your first choice of instrument, but maybe they offer you a second choice of instrument, right? Maybe if you don't get a keyboard spot, they offer you a synth spot, or maybe they offer you a rack spot or something along those lines, right? Again, just being a part of the process will help a ton as far as getting whatever spot you may want to in the future, right? So my first summer when I auditioned for Americanos, I remember putting on the snare drum, but I didn't put it on correctly because I'd never worn a marching snare drum. So then the snare drum just flew off of that carrier and onto the ground and made this huge crash, right? At that point, I instantly thought that I was cut, that they didn't want anything to do with me. I just probably broke their instrument and they were just going to cut me right then and there, right? the captain at the time picked up the drum, put it back on my carrier, and then we went right on, right? Now, I was shaking and I was probably very nervous at that point, but I probably also wasn't giving my best initial just effort that I was before because of what happened with the drum, right? So don't let those things discourage you, right? That was the very beginning of my drum corps career, and then I was able to march really great places later on, but only because I had that experience at such a young age and that experience with that drum corps, right? Everything I learned about drum corps probably came in that first summer. After that, everything I learned was more so how do I apply all those concepts that I learned in that first summer, right? So continue to make sure that you do the best that you possibly can, right? Which is a given. Try and make sure that you give your best effort at everything you do, right? The staff wants to see you at the best of your ability, right? And they don't want to see you perform nervous or timid, right? We'd much rather see you make a huge mistake that's very confident than make a small mistake that's very timid, right? It's very easy to fix that huge mistake, but that small mistake might take some time to be able to fix, right? All right, guys, so hopefully that's been a little bit of insight for you in auditioning for drum corps. Make sure that you do everything you can because as you continue out through that process, there are certain things that will separate you from the pack, right? Hopefully I've given you a few tips and tricks on what those things may be, right? Whether it be following a veteran member or how to ask questions to a staff or just how to just be in the general audition process, right? So feel free, if you have any questions, to send me an email. My email is Derrick, which is DERRICK, at percussivesoundscapes.com. Right? I'd be more than happy to answer any of your general drum corps audition questions, or if you are looking to audition for the Blue Knights Drum and Bugle Corps, I can answer those questions as well. Right? I'd like to say thank you to all of my sponsors, which would be Pearl, IP, Remo, Pearlogix, Zildjian, and Etymotic. Right? One other thing that I would suggest along the way is if you're looking to audition for a specific drum corps, maybe one of those veteran members, maybe one of those staff members would be open to having private lessons with you. Okay, that's a great way to get some insight prior to the camp. That might be really helpful for you. Okay. Anybody that wants to audition for the Blue Knights Drum and Bugle Corps, for example, they can sign up for music lessons at my academy, and I can place you with one of those staff members or myself where you can take lessons with them. Okay, and that is psmusicacademy.com. Right. So right now I'm giving lessons rather to quite a few people online across the country who are looking to audition for Blue Knights. Whether it be this year or in the future, right? And some of those people I also pair with some of those staff members. So the cool thing about that is not only will you get the experience with myself as the caption head, but you also get the experience of being maybe with a snare tech or a quad tech, depending upon what instrument you're looking to audition for. So hopefully those are some things that can help you guys along the way. Once again, feel free to answer or ask me any questions you may have through my email, and I wish you guys the best of luck as you move through your drum corps audition process. Thanks, guys. Take care.